Next hand. Classic spot. Small blind versus button. We 3-bet ace king, button calls. Queen 9-5. We c-bet. This is a board you could use big or small c-bets on because your nut advantage is a little bit devalued by the presence of the queen, and that's simply just because villain does have ace, queen, king, queen here. They can catch up and overtake your tens and jacks and stuff like that. So you still have a decent nut advantage here. You could use big bets in theory, you could use small. This is definitely a board that's quite good for you. It's not going to be a range bet in GTO, I don't think, although it would be like fairly high bet frequency. So we're just betting ace king often here. Why are we betting ace king? What was that thing we said about betting the middle of your range? That's mainly on the turn in the river. On the flop, equities are so close together, there's so much realization still to happen, that your fold equity is always much more useful on the flop than it would be on the turn or on the river. In fact, your fold equity on the river, when you have a mediocre hand, is usually entirely useless, because the hands that fold are dead. They're losing all the time to you. So this bet is fine. I would say that it's closer to a bluff than a value bet this time. The way to understand that this is now closer to a bluff is, well, if you can imagine plenty of combos with better hands than your hand folding, then your hand is definitely moving towards bluff domain. So again, one of the big skills when it comes to playing a hand like ace king is being able to ask yourself, is this a value bet? Is this a bluff? Are there elements of both? How much denial is there if villain folds? Like, how useful is the fold equity if villain folds? Did I just like give you guys the middle finger? I was actually counting reasons. I didn't mean that. So yeah, kind of a bluff, closer to a bluff than a value bet for sure, but there's all kinds of different elements going on the flop here, and sometimes on the flop you can bet for multiple reasons at once, but those reasons are not to represent the queen, guys. Never represent the queen. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear representing going on in this channel or in my community at all, because it's trash. Anyway, on to the turn. We barrel. So to understand our hand strength on the turn, you know, like, why are we able to bet this time, but we weren't betting before on that lower texture, the 6-5-4 deuce? It's not because that texture's terrible for range. That's not really it. It's because ace king had far more showdown value after that action sequence in that previous hand than it does here. So in the previous hand, the first one we looked at, we had middling equity on the turn, and that was partly because villain hadn't filtered as they've done here. When they call the flop, we have to understand at the bottom of their range, stuff like ace 10 of spades is going to disperse at quite a high frequency. It's going to land in the muck. Villain has a folding range, pocket fours, it's going to end up in the muck. What that means is that this hand is now doing a bit worse in terms of absolute equity than it would after an action sequence of check, check on the flop, where villain's range remains unfiltered, uncontracted, uncondensed. So because they've condensed on the flop by calling the c-bet here, this hand is now going to show down for very, very little of the pot whatsoever. Villain can actually bluff us off of this hand on the river because their range is strengthened. We're just going to really struggle to show down for much pot share, which means that bluffing is really good. And this might actually be a pure bluff. And the way to really get super technical about this is to like look at your suits and see if you block the king queen suited and queen jack suited and stuff with your broadways, whatever you have. But let's not even get into that today. Let's just say that when you have blockers to king queen off, ace queen off, all that sort of stuff, ace queen suited, you can definitely barrel. You have 2 live cards if you do get called by pocket pair region and stuff like that. This is a really clear double barrel. It's fine to barrel here. I don't know that it's pure in a solver. I don't know that solver always does it, but I would expect it's quite hard to defend here. If villain sometimes has to call a hand again like pocket 8s here at some frequency, and I suspect they probably do actually, maybe, depends on our sizing, this could easily get overfolded. So I think this barrel is really standard. It's just about understanding that in this particular case, ace king is quite low showdown value, but good redraw, decent blockers, out of position, check EV is not going to be very high, showdown EV unimproved, they'll be very low, therefore bluffing is fine. We don't have too much showdown value to bluff here, like we did in the last example. In other words, the box of check is not so lucrative that we need to choose it in favor of the bet box. Bluff is going to be fine, and probably the best play actually.